Welcome to the remote Pump DAFNE workshop. To get the best from the workshop, we recommend that you log in to Open Learn Create to access the remote Pump DAFNE participant course in the DAFNE participants section. Also, DAFNE Central Resources, the DAFNE Healthcare Professionals section Remote Pump DAFNE Participant Course tab to access recruitment information for participants, Remote Pump DAFNE Educator Manual, Remote Pump DAFNE Course Guide for participants, Hybrid Closed Loop Supplement, and the Remote Pump DAFNE Update September 2022 What's New. If you also want to deliver face-to-face Pump DAFNE courses, you'll need to have either completed face-to-face DAFNE Educator Training pre-2020 or remote DAFNE Educator Training and face-to-face conversion after 2020. As well as this pump training, access and view the webinar presentation What's Different in Face-to-Face Pump DAFNE in the Central Resources area, Webinars and Newsletters tab. This presentation outlines the remote Pump DAFNE course format, resources required, and where to find them. Remote Pump DAFNE training mirrors the flipped classroom format of the participant course. By reviewing the course content and supporting documents, you can identify the parts of the course, Educator Manual, Participant Guide or HCL Supplement that you'd like to discuss or have questions about in the 1-hour call that follows this presentation. Use your workshop pack to record your queries. Completion of the case study in the workshop pack is optional, but may be useful if you are new to insulin pumps and setting and adjusting basal and bolus insulin doses. The resources we have given you access to are those that you and your course participants will use for remote Pump DAFNE course delivery, with the exception of the workshop pack. Participants who are using hybrid closed-loop systems will need the hybrid closed-loop supplement as well as the course guide. The supplement highlights which parts of the course will be most useful and where guidance differs from general guidance for pump users. The tips that follow will help you find your way around the resources. The Remote DAFNE online course includes a lot of images, some of which might seem a little small for some people, so there are options for enlarging images within the course. Quite often the image will have a little click link at the bottom to view a larger image, so if we click on that, it takes you through to an enlarged version and then you can click back to the main screen. Other options for enlarging the whole screen could be in the settings, so the three little dots. If we click that, and in the zoom function, if we click this arrow, it will take us into full screen mode, and that just gets rid of the bits that are down the side of the screen and makes things a little bit larger. To come out of full screen mode, we press the F11 button in the top row on your keyboard, and that takes us back to the previous view. Or we can use the zoom function to increase the magnification as much as we would like. You can see that enlarges the image. Or if we just take that back to 100%, the other option is to hold down the Control key on your keyboard and use your mouse wheel scrolled away from you just to enlarge the whole screen. And then you can easily reduce back by scrolling back on the mouse wheel towards you. So there's some options for increasing your view on screen. The Educator Manual's quite a large document, and it can be tricky to find your way around and find the information that you're looking for. So here's some tips that may help you. Once you've opened the document in Word, click on View in your toolbar and then select Navigation pane. And you'll see down the left of the hand side of your screen, the navigation pane opens with the headings of each section that's listed in the contents of the document. So you can easily find your way around and select the content that you would be interested in. So, for example, if you want to look at the course outline, you can click on that section heading and it will take you straight there. We've provided the outline just to help you with planning of courses, and the outline covers from the pre-course appointment through to the group video support call for follow-up, which is about 6 to 8 weeks after the end of the course. And you'll see that we've laid these out beginning with week 1 through to weeks 13 to 15, which is the whole process of the course, and that's just to help you and your team to plan these courses into your work plans. So let's look at the Educator Manual and how that's laid out. So for each of your calls and sections, it's laid out in 4 parts. So section 1 is the timetable, section 2 is the participant jobs for the week, section 3 is the lesson plan, and section 4 is the activities and answers for activities that have been covered in that week's online learning. So for example, if we want to look at week 1, we can click on the timetable and see what's covered in the online unit and what's covered in the group video support call and the estimated timings. We can look at jobs for the week, so the things we're expecting people to do before they come on the group video support call. We can look at the lesson plan, and that lays out the timing, the purpose of the session, the learning outcomes, and then the resources for educators and the resources for participants, and then the lesson plan itself. And remember, the lesson plan is a roadmap, it's not a script. So it just covers the things that are likely to come up in discussion, and gives you some ideas of questions to ask and activities that will help to confirm the learning for the week. And the final section is section 4, and that's the activities and the answers. And you can see here the little arrow is white, but if we click that, it opens the whole section, and you can see all the activities that are covered in that week. So if someone says, actually, I'm not sure about activity 7, you can click on that and find it straight away, and you've got the activity and the answer there for discussion. There are also useful guides that you may want to refer to, and they are in the course guide for participants. So if we have a quick look at that. Again, if you open that document with the navigation pane, you'll be able to see week on week all the things that are covered in that document. And if you scroll down, you'll see there's a section at the end called Useful Guides, and that lays out week on week the things that you might want to refer to. So for example, if we look at week 4, you'll see that you've got the hypo and hypo treatments, you've got the hypo emergency response flow chart, you've got options for managing exercise, and all those useful bits of information about bolus reductions and basal rate adjustments. So you can refer to those as well as course participants having them to refer to in their guide. So let's just go back to the course guide. So if you were interested in having hard copy, then you don't need to print the whole document necessarily. For example, if you wanted to print the lesson plan for week 1, just select that title in the navigation pane, right click and then click Print Heading and Contents. That will select the lesson plan section and pull that through into print, and you can see it's just going to print what you've selected, and then click on Print. The Remote Pump DAFNE course is designed for people with type 1 diabetes who are already using an insulin pump and who want to maximise the benefits of pump therapy. The course does not replace a pump start or information on how to use pump functions specific to a manufacturer. The content is not pump specific and is suitable for people using tethered or patch pumps. Course content includes information for pump users who are using finger prick blood glucose, CGM systems, and has additional information for those using hybrid closed-loop systems. To help you to recruit to the course, we've provided information you can share with pump users who may be interested. The Remote Pump DAFNE information for course participants. This includes a description of the course, how long the course takes to complete, how the course is accessed, and what is covered each week, including the course timetable. The course outline is in section 1 of your Educator Manual. It shows the number of weeks the course runs over, the time required for educators to deliver each group video support call, excluding preparation time, and the estimated time it will take participants to complete to help your team to plan your courses. The Remote Pump DAFNE course includes a pre-course appointment 1 week before the introductory call, an introductory group video support call. We recommend this call is at the beginning of week 2 to allow time for overnight basal rate checking and accessing the online learning. 5 weeks of online learning and group video support calls at the end of each of the 5 weeks, and a follow-up group video support call 6 to 8 weeks after the week 5 group video support call. The course takes 13 to 15 weeks for participants to complete, and a total of approximately 47 to 57 hours of engagement with the course. The group video support calls at the end of each week's learning are estimated at 3.5 hours for the introductory call and weeks 1 to 4, 4 hours for week 5, and 3 hours for the follow-up support call. These timings are estimated based on the amount of content covered each week. If you have the capacity to include a questions for the doctor session as part of your course, but would prefer to keep the length of all calls to around 3.5 hours, consider adding questions for the doctor to the follow-up session 6 to 8 weeks post-course to avoid extending the week 5 call by 30 minutes. Alternatively, highlight the extra time for questions for the doctor with your group and ask for agreement from your group to spend the extra time on the week 5 call. Although the course guide includes information on joining video support calls, these sessions can be delivered face-to-face using the same lesson plans, if your team decide this would be more appropriate for your service and your groups. If you decide to deliver the sessions face-to-face, you'll need to consider room availability and capacity, providing refreshments for breaks, sharps disposal and access to toilets, hand washing, parking or public transport links to your venue. In line with the direction of travel of the NHS as a whole, The remote Pump DAFNE course is paper light. The only hard copy resource participants require is the carb portion list. If participants are interested in fat and protein content of foods, they may wish to refer to the carb and calorie counter for fat and protein content. However, we've not included counting fat and protein in the course, just an awareness of what is classed as a larger portion. All course information is included in the online unit and course guide. Therefore, there is a similar amount of learning from home each week. Weekly group video support calls are structured in a similar way to the remote DAFNE course. The suggested timing for calls allows time to cover the content and to discuss pump settings, where to find them and how to adjust them. The learning builds in complexity through the weeks, encouraging participants to use pump functions. Participants continue to have access to the online course for reference and to refresh their knowledge after they have completed the course. The pre-course appointment for the remote Pump DAFNE course remains largely the same as for other DAFNE course formats. An outline of what to cover in the pre-course appointment is included in the pre-course appointment section of your educator manual. The pre-course appointment for the remote Pump DAFNE course is very similar to a pre-course appointment for other course formats. We know that it's important in a pre-course appointment to make sure that people are aware of the time commitment required for the learning from home. The pre-course appointment for the remote Pump DAFNE course is very similar to a pre-course appointment for other course formats. We know that it's important in a pre-course appointment to make sure that people are aware of the time commitment required for the learning from home, as well as from the group video support calls. It's also important in the remote Pump DAFNE pre-course appointment to do an equipment check, so just to make sure that glucose checking equipment is in working order and that participants have syringes or pens and insulin in case they need to go back to MDI, and they have blood ketone checking equipment as well. It's also an opportunity to discuss the insulin regimen and to collect data. The course participant IT requirements are detailed in your educator manual in this section, as are the resources that you need to send to course participants as soon as possible after the pre-course appointment. When discussing the Pump DAFNE insulin regimen, it may be that participants don't need to make any changes to their insulin regimen initially, because remember that they are going to be reviewing their basal rates from the introductory call or before, beginning with the overnight basal rate. So it may not be necessary to make significant adjustments unless any of the criteria here come into play. Data collection is very similar to other course formats. Participants also need to know that you will be talking about sharing their carb count. Read the pre-course appointment section of the educator manual and make a note of any queries you have about the pre-course appointment to discuss in the workshop following this presentation. Make use of your pre-course appointment to find out how familiar participants are with their pump settings, how to find them, check them and reset them. Consider what additional information participants may need, such as their pump manual, quick guides or videos from their pump manufacturer, on how to access pump settings. Provide participants with the hard copy card portion list, electronic remote Pump DAFNE course guide for participants, and the hybrid closed loop supplement if appropriate, as soon as possible after the pre-course appointment and after adding your local information to the course guide. As mentioned, all the course information for participants is in one document, the Remote Pump DAFNE course guide for participants. Send the guide as soon as possible after the pre-course appointment. Before you send the guide, add your local information to it, including the enrolment key for the Remote Pump DAFNE online course from the DAFNE Central Resources area Enrolment Keys tab. Add the dates and times of your group video support calls and the link for your Microsoft Teams calls, the contact details of your local administrator and course educators. If you're going to use a system other than Microsoft Teams, you'll need to amend the document or create your own participant information. We've produced a short document also in the Remote Pump DAFNE Participant Course tab, Remote Pump DAFNE Guidance for Administrators, as a reminder of the admin tasks, including what to add to the course guide. Participants are asked to complete jobs for the week before their introductory support call, as detailed in the Jobs for the Week checklist in the pre-course preparation and introductory call section of their course guide. The aim of pre-course preparation is to ensure that participants have the opportunity to check their equipment and settings. That is, that their glucose monitoring equipment is accurate for both glucose and sensor glucose checks. And they can find the pump settings they may need to adjust, set the insulin action time in their pump to 4 hours. Participants are asked to decide on their personal glucose targets and set an appropriate glucose target in their pump. DAFNE glucose targets are included in week 1. Participants use their pump as usual and begin the process of basal rate checking overnight and thinking about their long-term goals and the group agreement before accessing the course. The lesson plan for the introductory call is in the Educator Manual Pre-Course Preparation and Introductory Support Call section. We recommend that the introductory call is at the beginning of the week so that participants are clear about what they are expected to do and have the rest of the week to check overnight basal rates before accessing week 1 of the online course and moving on to basal rate checking in the morning and afternoon time blocks before their week 1 group video support call at the end of week 1. Let's look at navigating the online course. When finding their way around the Remote Pump DAFNE course for participants, each week has an introductory page, and that is a reminder of the content that has been covered in other weeks. So we're looking at week 2, so there's a reminder of what was covered in week 1 and what we're going to cover in week 2. There's also information about finding your way around the course, so information about clicking out into additional content by using the control button and click to open additional content in a new window, and that way participants can view content in a different window and then just click back into the original window to carry on with the course. There's also a note for hybrid closed loop users indicating the icon that shows information that's just for them, and highlighting that not all of the information in the course is relevant to them, and that there is additional information provided. There's also a reminder of DAFNE terminology at the beginning of each week, just so that participants can check this, and there's a link to the course glossary, so if there are any words or terms in the course content, they can click on the glossary to find a definition if they're not sure. There's also a timetable at the beginning of each week highlighting what's being covered and the estimated time to complete, and a reminder that the jobs for the week are detailed in their participant guide. The remote Pump DAFNE course includes a download and print function for course activities with free text answers. When participants click on the Save button at the end of the activity, their answer will be pulled into a downloadable document. The document includes participant answers to activities completed each week, building a complete record of their free text answers from week 1 to week 5. When participants click on the Answers function at the top left of their screen, the download will open. They can then either save the download to their device or print it if they would prefer to have a hard copy. There is a useful guides section in the online course. These include mini summaries of DAFNE principles covered in the week. Useful guides are also included at the end of the course guide for participants. Participants may find it useful to print some of the guides to refer to before completing activities. For example, guides for managing alcohol and exercise may be useful to refer to before completing the activities on these topics in week 4. The additional information section of the online course isn't a section that participants need to review. It is the section that holds the links out of the main course to optional activities and to some of the information specific to hybrid closed-loop users. Content in the Additional Information tab does not contribute to the course progress bar. For example, participants who are more confident with carbohydrate counting can complete the activities in the main body of the course. So let's look at an example of clicking out to additional content. Those who are less confident information for hybrid closed-loop users in the main content of the course is indicated by this icon. If the information is brief, it's included in the main content. More detailed information is in the additional information section, accessed through a click-out link. They do not need to review this content to complete the course. You can see it pulls you through into the additional information for hybrid closed-loop users about managing hypos and hypo-alerts. And when participants have reviewed the content, they can click the link to return to the main content. And it takes you back to the page that you left from, so that you can continue the course from there. Now we have looked at the course structure and navigating the course, let's look at the course content in more detail. As with Remote DAFNE, the course content is divided into 5 weeks learning. Each week focuses on a different aspect of Remote Pump DAFNE. Week 1 is about the basics of glucose checks and targets, building on discussion in the introductory call, introducing the Pump DAFNE diary and the usefulness of keeping a record to guide dose adjustment decisions, insulin and how it works in the pump, checking the basal rate during the morning and afternoon time blocks, carbohydrate counting, glycemic index, and the use of different bolus options, and possible problems with your insulin pump. Every week includes goal setting and action planning, and an example of an action plan. Every week also includes an end-of-week quiz that participants can complete to check their learning. At the beginning of week 1, participants are introduced to 6 characters used in examples, activities and scenarios throughout the course. The aim of the character is to show different lifestyles, diabetes-related goals, insulin sensitivities, basal rates, ratios and correction factors, and methods of glucose checking. Course participants may identify with a character as they progress through the course, or different characters may promote discussion. Week 1 builds on discussion in the introductory call around glucose checking and glucose targets, as you'll be aware from review of the content of Week 1. DAFNE glucose targets are introduced with more detailed information about the difference between blood and sensor glucose, time in range and HbA1c. Information and examples are included in Week 1 on basal rate checking in the morning and afternoon time blocks, including both diary and CGM illustrations. CGM illustrations are generic as we don't align to a single device. Quick-acting insulin is introduced as a topic in Week 1, as this is the only type of insulin used in a pump. Basal insulin is introduced in Week 5 as part of the topic Problems with your insulin pump and going back to pens. The importance of bolusing 15 minutes pre-meal is included as it is clear for CGM results that pre-bolusing makes a difference to postprandial glucose and time in range. The importance of pre-bolusing for hybrid closed loop users is also emphasised. The recommendation for hypo treatment is 15 to 20 grams of rapid-acting carbohydrate, recheck after 15 minutes and repeat the treatment if you're still hypo. We don't recommend following up with slower-acting carbs in remote pump DAFNE. In DAFNE we use the physiological classification of hypoglycemia, which is 3.5 millimoles per litre and based on the work of Professor Stephanie Emile and Professor Simon Heller. This doesn't mean that you don't do anything with a blood glucose less than DAFNE targets. We use the treat or eat guidance. For a hypo alert, blood glucose less than target, above 3.5 but less than 4 in the day, or less than 5 in the night or before breakfast, eat 10 grams of carbs. For a hypo, treat with 15 to 20 grams of rapid-acting carbs. Check blood glucose after 15 minutes and repeat the treatment if not back in target. The advice is about checking glucose and taking small amounts of carbs to get back into target. It may not be a one-off, rather than not checking and following up with larger amounts of slower-acting carbs. There is different DAFNE guidance for insulin mistakes, when someone has accidentally taken more insulin than required, and this does include using more carbs than the general treat or eat guidance. The DAFNE insulin regimen uses insulin in a physiological way to avoid over-insulinization, hence the DAFNE starting regimen often requiring dose reductions. Hypos are most likely to be due to small errors in carb counting, requiring less carbs to get back into target. It's a balance between the insulin regimen and the carbs. The hypo alert and hypo guidance will bring blood glucose back into target. Following up with longer acting carbs will result in overshooting the target and above target glucose. In this situation, people are tempted to correct the above target glucose, resulting in roller coaster blood glucose and less time in range. CGM traces often show this pattern, and this is reflected in guidance for CGM users to refine the amount of carbs they take for below-range glucose. The DAFNE guidance reflects this, in line with the move for wider availability of CGM. As more people with type 1 diabetes use CGM, they'll see this for themselves and be able to predict the effect of 10 grams of carbs for them individually. The amount of carbs people choose to take to treat a hypo or hypoalert may be more than the DAFNE guidance when they begin a course. As the insulin regimen is refined and confidence increases, and people can see post-treatment glucose on CGM, people are generally happy to adopt this approach. Pump users may have been counting carbs for some time, probably longer than DAFNE participants using MDI therapy. The focus on carb counting in remote Pump DAFNE is improving accuracy rather than introducing carb counting as a new concept. Accurate carb counting is key to checking ratios and implementing other DAFNE principles, so the importance of accurate carb counting is emphasised in week 1 and throughout the course. For all pump users, including those using hybrid closed-loop systems. There are 5 carbohydrate counting activities in week 1 designed to encourage participants to think about different carbohydrate foods and the possible use of different bolus types, using the carb portion list carb counting resource, using the carb formula, and considering what affects the accuracy of carb counting and possible mistakes that could happen. Participants are asked to note any queries or points for discussion in the course guide. These may relate to activities they've completed. To use activities for discussion during the video support call, either keep the course open on your computer and screen share the relevant activity, or refer to the activities and answers for week 1 in your educator manual. Week 2 builds on week 1 and moves on to checking basal rates in the early and late evening time blocks, and checking ratios in any time blocks where the basal rate has already been checked. The course guide for participants acknowledges that people may not have been able to check their basal rate overnight before week 1, and their basal rate in the morning and afternoon time blocks in week 1, but encourages participants to continue the checks. Week 2 includes further practice with carb counting, checking, setting and adjusting ratios, and using different bolus options. To illustrate basal rate checking, examples are given. Jill uses blood glucose checking, so her example shows a version of the Pump DAFNE diary only. Luca uses CGM, so his example shows a CGM trace and a diary. Participants can choose how they share their data in the group video support calls, either diary or download. There are alternative diary formats in Word and Excel provided by course participants and educators in the DAFNE Central Resources area, Remote Pump DAFNE Participant Course tab. If your participants would like to use a diary, choose the version that you think will suit them best. Week 2 includes carb counting based on using labels, recipes, and includes additional activities in a click-out link for those who would like more practice at home. Participants are asked to consider the effect of snacks, and as in week 1, hybrid closed-loop users are reminded of the importance of accurate carb counting to help the system achieve more glucose in target. Participants are provided with information and examples of how to check ratios in week 2, and, as mentioned, encouraged to begin ratio checks in time blocks where they have already checked their basal rate. Information is provided on how to use the 400 rule. This may be beneficial for participants whose pump regimen may be overcomplex, as a way of getting back to a basic starting point for all ratios across the day. Most participants will be able to check their ratios by following the guidance on ratio checking and observing the results of their personal glucose checks. Information is provided on setting ratios using method 1, grams of carbs to 1 unit of insulin. It's likely most pump users will use this method. There is the option of using method 2, units of insulin to 10 grams of carbs, as in the QA to CP ratios in DAFNE for pen users, if participants prefer and their pump allows ratios to be set in this way. We encourage participants to check their ratio twice on days when their glucose is in target before the meal. The process is check their glucose before the meal. The meal needs to be a small carb load of 30 to 40 grams counted accurately. Bolus 15 minutes before eating using a normal bolus. Eat the meal. Do not have anything else to eat. Only have carb-free drinks. Do not take a bolus until the following mealtime or bedtime, at least 4 hours later. Check their glucose before the next meal or bed. Examples illustrate the possible results of a ratio check, including diary and CGM results. Additional information on how to assess ratios is provided for hybrid closed-loop users. 6 activities are included to illustrate the possible use of different bolus types for different meals. Participants may not agree with the suggested recommendation. The effect of GI is very individual. The activities are included to promote discussion and to encourage participants to think about the effect of different foods on their glucose and consider using different bolus types as an option to help achieve their glucose targets. The focus of week 3 is the DAFNE stepwise approach for insulin dose adjustment, adding to previous basal rate and ratio checks. Participants may still be checking basal rates and ratios in week 3 and can do this in conjunction with the stepwise approach. The focus is still on accurate carb counting, and it's important that participants are confident in their basal rates and ratios before moving on to checking their correction factors or applying the insulin adjustment advice for lifestyle factors in the weeks that follow. The lesson plan for the group video support call for week 3 includes the opportunity for a 30-minute discussion around where group members are with their basal and ratio checks and share the challenges and solutions to checking these pump settings. In the Pump DAFNE, we use the term correction factor rather than insulin sensitivity factor because we refer to bolus corrections throughout the online learning. As you know, an insulin pump correction factor can be set as a single figure rather than a 2 to 3 millimole range as we use in MDI DAFNE. We do not refer to carb corrections in remote pump DAFNE because it's unlikely a pump user will choose to eat extra carbs for a below target glucose pre-meal because the bolus advisor will automatically reduce the mealtime bolus. We refer to taking 10 grams of carbs for hypo alerts, below target glucose but not hypo, at other times of the day, for example, before bed. Information on hybrid closed loop users differs as the system will compensate for a glucose below target, so additional carbs may not be required. The course content includes examples of using the 130 rule to check a correction factor. As with the 400 rule, this may be useful for participants who have overcomplicated correction factors as a way of getting back to basics across the 24-hour period. Most participants will be able to check their own correction factor by observing the effect of bolus corrections on their glucose and adjusting accordingly. Participants are encouraged to put the learning into practice by checking their own correction factor, either by using the 130 rule or by observing the effect of bolus corrections on glucose, while acknowledging that they may not be able to check correction factors in all the time blocks in the week, as that relies on them being out of target to use a correction. Participants may wish to discuss correction factor checks before making adjustments if they're not confident about finding their correction factor for each time block in their pump settings and making changes themselves. Pump manuals may be useful references in week 3 for this reason. Participants can refer to their record of pump settings at the end of week 3 during the focused Pump DAFNE diary discussion if this is the case. The Pump DAFNE diary includes 5 time blocks because some people find they are more sensitive to bolus corrections after 9 in the evening. Being able to set a different correction factor in the late evening time block can help some people to avoid overnight hypos caused by overcorrecting in the evening. The stepwise approach in Pump DAFNE is the same as in the MDI course, other than the insulin adjustment of basal rates or ratios. The differences relate to a smaller incremental change to insulin doses using a pump. Participants change their basal rate by 0.05 to 0.1 units per hour, that's 10 or 20%, 2 hours prior to the change in glucose, rather than changing a twice-daily BI dose. There are 2 ways to adjust ratios using the bolus advisor. Method 1, adjusting by 1 to 2 grams of carbs per unit of insulin. Method 2, adjusting by 0.5 units of insulin to 10 grams of carbs, as in MDI DAFNE. There are 4 activities that relate to increasing insulin doses and 3 activities that relate to decreasing insulin doses that can be discussed as part of the group video support calls. Each activity relates to a time block and is illustrated using a course character. Diary examples only focus on the time block in question, not a 24-hour diary, because the aim is to encourage participants to think about their glucose management in terms of time blocks, to focus on a time block to help them see patterns and identify solutions. This is a similar approach to MDI DAFNE when we focus the examples on particular meal times or overnight glucose management scenarios. Remote Pump DAFNE makes greater use of delayed or missed meals for basal rate checking in time blocks. We don't recommend carb-free meals in Pump DAFNE because of the possible effect of fat and protein on glucose. The focus of week 4 is managing lifestyle factors such as activity and exercise, alcohol and eating out, and their effect on glucose, particularly as a possible cause of hypos. Previous dose adjustment advice has focused on changes to basal rates, ratios and correction factors. Weeks 4 and 5 introduce the use of temporary basal rates as part of the management strategy for exercise, alcohol and illness, building on previously acquired skills. Hypo treatments, as discussed in previous weeks, are recapped in week 4, and the causes and treatment of mild and severe hypos is covered in more detail. Participants may wish to have a family member or friend with them for the discussion of hypos in week 4. The information for managing hypos and hypoalerts is the same as in MDI DAFNE. Alternative guidance is provided for hybrid closed-loop users who are likely to require 5 to 10 grams of carbs to treat a hypo and may not require extra carbs for a hypoalert. Information is included on using CGM alarms and trend arrows to prevent below target glucose, and is linked with the recommended time in range targets and avoiding low and very low glucose, and highlighting that sleeping through nighttime hypos can contribute to time below range. Exercise or activity advice is based on current evidence, highlighting the possible causes of hypos when you are more active and how to avoid them. Exercise guidance includes using CGM to monitor glucose when exercising and when a blood glucose check is advisable. Information for hybrid closed-loop users focuses on different management strategies related to the functions of the system. The hybrid closed-loop supplement contains all the information and guidance for hybrid closed-loop users, Managing exercise using HCL is the topic where guidance differs most from the general guidance for pump users. Make sure you're familiar with the content of the hybrid closed-loop supplement if you'll have hybrid closed-loop users attending your courses. The target glucose at the start of exercise is 7 to 15, as in MDI DAFNE, and this also applies to HCL users. For unplanned exercise or exercise of a long duration, taking 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour, that is 10 to 20 grams every 20 minutes, seems to work well. This can be refined depending on glucose checks by using 0.5 of a gram per kilogram per hour. There's a link to a Diabetes Technology Network video that provides information on how to use CGM trend arrows to make decisions about how much carbs to have before and during exercise. Hybrid closed-loop users can also use this guidance and trend arrows to determine how much carb to take. Bolus insulin reductions are recommended if a bolus is within 2 hours before or 2 hours after exercise. A 50% reduction could be a safe starting point, followed by using the information in Table 3 to guide decisions. HCL users have the option of adjusting insulin for planned exercise, but should follow the guidance in Table 4. Bolus reductions are smaller and within a shorter time frame of the activity. For exercise that is more than 2 hours after the meal or snack, basal adjustments using a temporary basal rate are more appropriate, starting 60 to 90 minutes before the exercise and continuing until the end of the exercise. A reduction of 50 to 80% is recommended. Basal rate may also need reducing after exercise, as shown in Table 5. Options for basal adjustment for hybrid closed-loop users vary according to the system. Alternative advice is included in the course and the hybrid closed-loop supplement. Alternative advice for managing exercise that can increase glucose is also provided for HCL users. Week 4 includes 8 activities to apply the exercise management strategies to different exercise scenarios. The aim of the scenarios is to confirm that there can be more than one approach to exercise management and promote discussion around options. This is why the answers are phrased as could do rather than should do. We have expanded the list of carb-containing alcoholic drinks. However, it's difficult to get accurate information as manufacturers are not obliged to provide nutrition or ingredients information other than for the avoidance of allergens. Brands and even flavours can vary in carb content, so the tables included in the course are for information and a rough guide. Participants can use the guidance with caution or find the carb content of their own drinks if they can. Sweet wine and sweet martini and sherry have been moved to the table alcoholic drinks with carbs, as they have around 5 grams of carbs for 50 ml measure. In MDI DAFNE they're included in the low carb drinks section. You may have noticed that there are 2 figures for sweet dessert wine. This relates to the different size measures referred to in the table. The strategy for managing glucose and alcoholic drinks that contain carbs is different from MDI DAFNE. If only 10 grams of carbs is taken, no action is required. If more than 10 grams of carbs is taken, then add up all the grams of carbs, including the first 10, half the total grams of carbs, enter the number for half the grams of carbs into the bolus advisor, and bolus using the normal ratio for the time of day. Override the bolus calculator to avoid having a bolus correction if necessary. If you're drinking alcohol in the evening, you may reduce your basal rate to an 80% temporary basal rate, that's a 20% reduction, for 8 to 10 hours or all night. And that's on going to bed, and you may or may not eat carbs to prevent a delayed hypo. Sometimes you might need to reduce your basal rate the next day as well by 10%. For alcoholic drinks without carbs, the focus is on basal rate reductions and/or eating carbs. 1 to 2 units of alcohol should not increase the risk of a hypo, so no action should be required. 3 or more units of alcohol taken in the evening may require a reduction in basal rate to an 80% temporary basal rate for 8 to 10 hours or all night on going to bed, and you may or may not need to eat extra carbs. You could consider a temporary change to the lower alert alarm on CGM to 4.5. 3 or more units of alcohol taken during the day may reduce glucose. Regular glucose checks will show the effect of alcohol on glucose. The bolus calculator will reduce the amount of insulin with meals if glucose is below target, but you may wish to make a manual adjustment to avoid hypos. If not planning to eat a meal, you may choose to eat some carbs without a bolus to keep glucose in target. Online content includes 3 scenarios using course characters. During your group video support calls, if appropriate, you can discuss glucose management strategies related to the experience in the group, or discuss a scenario that is similar to the experiences shared in the group. The focus of Week 5 is managing illness and planning for the long term. In Week 5, we revisit participants' goals and spend some time developing their action plan for the next 6 to 8 weeks until the follow-up appointment. Participants have had 5 weeks to practice self-management skills of carb counting, the DAFNE insulin dose adjustment principles, using a variety of pump functions and weekly action planning. Participants may wish to have a family member with them on the call for discussion of sick day rules and questions for the doctor, if this is an option locally, and you plan to include questions for the doctor in Week 5. We recommend blood glucose checking rather than CGM use when managing illness, so sick day rules information refers to blood glucose to highlight that illness is a situation where blood glucose checks are preferable to sensor glucose. Sick day rules differ from MDI DAFNE as they include the option to increase basal rates using a temporary basal rate in minor illness sick day rules. In minor illness sick day rules, blood glucose and ketone checking is recommended at 2 to 4 hourly intervals, not 4 to 6 hourly as in MDI DAFNE. Participants are encouraged to rule out pump failure as a cause of above target blood glucose and ketones, and to have backup pens and insulin. Although SGLT2s are off licence in type 1 diabetes, some participants may have them prescribed by their consultant. If participants are taking SGLT tablets, they are advised to follow guidance provided locally. Hybrid closed-loop users are encouraged to let the system make its own adjustments for minor illness. Sick day rules differ from MDI as they include the option to increase basal rates using a temporary basal rate in severe illness sick day rules. As in minor illness sick day rules, participants are encouraged to rule out pump failure as a cause for above target blood glucose and ketones. And as in minor illness sick day rules, if participants are taking SGLT tablets, they're advised to follow guidance provided locally. Hybrid closed loop users are advised to follow advice provided by their team locally to manage severe illness. Make sure you're aware of local guidance for HCL users on managing severe illness if they will be attending your courses. The course includes 5 character-based scenarios on managing minor and severe illness. Group video support call discussions around illness management can be based around these scenarios. Sick day rules are followed by a recap of what to do if there is a problem with your pump, linking this information to illness management sick day rules and including 2 character-based scenarios based on problems with the pump. As in sick day rules, the focus is on blood glucose checks rather than sensor glucose if there is the possibility of pump failure. The information on going back to pens includes types and action profiles of basal insulins and how to go back to MDI. We've not included information on how to check if BI doses are correct, as a switch to pens is usually short-term until the problem with the pump is resolved. Participants who wish to take a pump holiday may need information from MDI DAFNE on how to check and adjust basal insulin. The long-term health and diabetes session focuses on the topics outlined here and is very similar to remote DAFNE. So healthy diet, balanced meals, carbohydrate, fat and fibre, regular exercise and what help to expect from the healthcare team. And as in remote DAFNE, the session doesn't include information about complications of diabetes. The session on work travel and healthy pregnancy are very similar to remote DAFNE. And the content on pregnancy is in the additional information, so is optional for course participants. Discussion of these topics as part of the group video support call is optional depending on time available and questions raised. The focus of discussion is topics related to glucose management, illness and the possible effect of fat and protein on glucose in week 5. We've worked closely with the DAFNE team and the Australian Protein Fat Working Group to develop examples of using add-on fat protein boluses. Additional insulin for nutrients other than carbs is recommended by the American Diabetes Association, but there isn't as yet an agreed recommended dosing algorithm. Week 5 includes pictures of foods or meals that contain around 30 grams of fat or 40 grams of protein, to give an idea of portion sizes that might affect glucose. Research suggests that 50 grams of protein is the threshold for protein without carbs. As we're not encouraging fat and protein counting, basic portion size pictures are sufficient to give people an idea of portion sizes that may have an effect. Participants are asked to identify their own high-fat and/or high-protein foods between week 5 of the course and the follow-up call 6 to 8 weeks post-course. This is to allow participants time to finish basal ratio and correction factor checks and time to identify their own meals that may affect glucose before considering dosing for them. Week 5 of the course outlines a 4-step approach to identifying their own high-fat, high-protein meals. This approach does not transfer from one particular meal to another. For example, the approach taken for fish and chips can't be applied to a different high-fat or high-protein meal, such as steak pie, creamy mash and vegetables. This can make it a long process, so participants may not have identified their meals before the follow-up call. The follow-up group video support call, 6 to 8 weeks post-course, is very similar to that in remote DAFNE. It includes an optional 30 minutes to discuss add-on fat protein bolusing. You can include questions for the doctor as part of the follow-up call rather than the week 5 call if you feel the timing will suit you and your groups better. The guidance for bolusing for high-fat, high-protein foods is based on research, but the evidence base is variable, so this advice is similar to the advice for managing alcohol and exercise. The approach required will vary between individuals and may not be for everyone. It will be important to work with individual experience. Some people may see an effect at lower or higher fat and protein levels. Some may see no effect at all. There are 2 methods depending on the carb content of the meal, with carbs or no carbs. Participants are encouraged to take a stepwise approach to bolusing for these foods and use the evidence from their own experience and glucose check results to decide on a course of action. For high-fat and/or high-protein foods with carbs, the main points to note are it's not usually recommended to add on more than 40% extra bolus. Focus on getting the add-on percentage right first. The split of the bolus may need adjusting depending on glucose checks. For example, a 70-30 split may work better if the postprandial glucose rise is too great and more insulin is required up front. Carmel Smart's work currently suggests a 70-30 split works best in her experience, but we're advising starting low and building up. If a participant would rather start with a 70-30 split, that's fine. You'd then need to focus on the bolus extension. The bolus extension may need to be more or less than 3 hours. If the postprandial rise is too great, perhaps 60 to 90 minutes post-meal, shorten the extension time. If glucose is above target after the bolus extension, the extension may need to be longer. Carmel Smart's work suggests that very long bolus extensions are rarely required, and that often the bolus extension needs to be shortened to 2 hours. For high-protein foods without carbs, a safe place to start is count a low-carb, high-protein meal as 10 grams of carbs for the whole meal. Calculate your bolus using your usual ratio. Give a normal bolus 15 minutes pre-meal. For high-protein foods without carbs, evidence suggests that the amount of protein that would affect glucose is larger, around 50 grams. However, as we're not advocating fat protein counting, the approach should be guided by participants' reflections on which foods and portion sizes cause a delayed rise in glucose for them individually. Activities in the course guide follow-up section focus on the process for bolusing for high-fat and/or high-protein foods. The emphasis is on repeating the meal to confirm the effect, start low and build up, only change one thing at a time. Group video support calls follow the same format as those for Remote DAFNE. Discussion of participant experience during the week, what's gone well, queries and points for discussion from the online content, referring to online activities as necessary, feedback on carb counting of a specific meal, and discussion of the Pump DAFNE diary or CGM and the focus of the week. The timetable, participant tasks, lesson plans and online activities for each week are in the Remote Pump DAFNE Educator Manual, as discussed previously. Useful guides to refer to in the call are in the course guide for participants. The Hybrid Closed Loop supplement contains information for hybrid closed loop users. The document Differences between hybrid closed loop systems available is used as a reference for educators in the introductory call to clarify the features of participants' hybrid closed loop systems so that they can record them in their hybrid closed loop supplement as part of the introductory call. To help you to find the activities online, the activity numbers are shown in the tabs on the left of the screen. As mentioned previously, the time for each call is estimated as 3.5 hours for weeks 1 to 4, 4 hours for week 5, to allow for participants to check and change pump settings if required. We recommend you have pump manuals for quick guides to hand for the pumps used by participants. We hope this presentation has been a useful part of your Remote Pump DAFNE training. Make a note of any questions you still have and points you'd like clarified or to discuss during your workshop group video call in your workshop pack. We've included an ongoing case study in your workshop pack in case you'd like to use it to apply Pump DAFNE principles. The case study is optional but can be discussed during the 1-hour workshop if the majority of the group would find it useful. We've also included one of the alcohol scenarios as the dose adjustment advice is different to MDI DAFNE.